Please keep the applause going. Let's hear it for Naomi.
Halfway through my PhD in mechanical engineering and applied mechanics, I found myself struggling to locate the love of research within myself. And I was also having trouble finding a man. I accepted an internship at Microsoft Research, something I thought would certainly help with the former problem, and I hoped that it would also help with the latter. My man type of preference is squishy, nerdy, pasty programmers. My main undergraduate romance had been founded on 4-bar linkage simulators and self-driving electric scooters and robots, and we got engaged, but 2 months later, he called things off after suddenly developing an interest in hooking up with other women. This was honestly very disappointing, and it had left me quite shaken. So 3 years later, I hadn't quite recovered, but at 25-something, I was feeling like an Appalachian old maid, and I was off to Microsoft. I was not surprised at Microsoft to find far more male interns than female interns, but I was surprised to find that many of the men were in long-term committed relationships. But despite this challenge, I began socializing with the other interns, and on one hiking adventure to Rattlesnake Ridge, a fellow intern named John Vilk nudged me on the arm to show me a tiny, adorable chipmunk. Several weeks later, John and I found ourselves the only members of our friend group interested in a day-long bout of Seattle tourism. And he shared his plan with me the day before that he would meet me after obtaining coffee in the morning. For me, I hope, I cheekily replied. For me, this was quite unusual behavior. On the whole, I'm very quiet and introverted, and I'm certainly not a good self-advocate. But I was becoming interested in John, and my desire for coffee had emboldened me. His helpful reply was, "Sure, do you want cream and sugar?" This was useful for getting coffee, but not for discerning if he was likewise interested. So we went off on this adventure, this day-long Seattle tourism, and it was full of mixed messages. We began the day with a cozy brunch, and when the check came, John quickly proposed that we split it. Later, we went to an improv show called The Naked Brunch, which was at the Rendezvous Cafe. And during the performance, one of the performers asked if we were a couple, and I quickly said no. And our last stop of the day was an underground tour of Seattle's historic prostitution industry. At the end of the tour, our guide playfully said, "You know, if anyone has lustful feelings that they want to get out, you should do it now while we're underground before you go home." And John and I lingered for a palpably long time in the tour's gift shop center, but neither of us made a move. The next Friday, though, through a series of unexpected and nerdy events, I found myself moving into John's apartment. So now we were living together, and after a few days of this, I said, "You know, it's weird that I'm platonically living on your couch." And he must have gotten the message there, because the next day, he told me he liked me. But at the moment, I was unready to process this, so my response was, "I gotta go to work." And I went into the office to work on my system for cardiovascular health monitoring. That was my summer project. And later that night, we returned home, we platonically cooked dinner, and I wanted to bring up that topic from earlier in the day, but my social awkwardness was in full throttle. So what came out of my mouth was, John asked for clarification, and this repeated a few times. And eventually I admitted something slightly more helpful. We should talk. Talk about what? John reasonably inquired. Next, we sat on the couch, and I proceeded to silently stare at him for several minutes. Eventually, I admitted something slightly more helpful. What are your intentions? Eventually clarifying that I meant this in a father-in-law-like way. He said that he was interested in a serious relationship, and so I proceeded to tell him everything that was wrong with myself. I was not getting any younger, and if any of this was going to scare him away, I wanted it to be soon. He patiently listened to all of this, and at the end he said, "Oh, that's it? That's fine." In our wedding vows later, he said to me, "The first time we talked, you surprised me several times. You were quiet and refused to curse, but kept mentioning strippers." Thank you.
Let's hear it for Naomi.